Hello everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today, and to our wonderful hosts at CES for bringing this session together. It is fantastic to see Digital Therapeutics have such a moment at CES and to be joined by some of the brightest and most influential brains in the digital therapeutics space as we delve deeper into this topic. My name is Gemma Jennings, I'm here from BBC Studios, and I know that our panelists have a lot to contribute to today's discussion, and so I want to dive right in as we explore how technology-driven treatments are transforming healthcare, improving patient outcomes, and redefining medicine. So, without further ado, allow me to welcome each of our panelists. First, on the end there, we have Edward Cox. Ed is Head and General Manager of Digital Health and Medicines at Pfizer, an innovative, inspiring, and relentless digital health executive. Ed has been committed to advancing the sector as it strives for better patient outcomes, clinical results, and commercial viability. Prior to joining Pfizer, he was Executive Vice President of Strategic Alliances and Head of Digital Medicines at Eversana Life Science Services and CEO at DTx Sciences. He is a member of the Leadership Council at the CNS Summit and a board member at the nonprofit Decentralized Trials and Research Alliance. Welcome, Ed. We have Jeff Wieners joining us, and he is Head of Digital Investments for Otsuka Precision Health. Jeff leads early-stage venture investments, M&A, and strategic partnerships, covering investment areas which include digital biomarkers, precision and connected health solutions. And before Otsuka, Jeff led United Health Group's R&D medical conditions venture investment portfolio. Jeff, welcome. Next, we have Sarah Hill. Sarah is CEO of Helium, an immersive media channel powered by the body's electricity via fitness trackers. Sarah is a former interactive TV news journalist for NBC, ABC, CBS, and 12-time Mid-America Emmy Award-winning storyteller, and she's led successful media teams for the past 25 years. Her company, Helium, is rooted in the intersection of sentient and spatial computing, AI, and storytelling. Their mental wellness products allow users to see their feelings so that they can learn to self-regulate stress, anxiety, and sleep. Sarah, the world needs more of that. Thank you for being here.
Hello, everyone.
Also joining us today is Dr. Patrick B. Thomas. Patrick is an award-winning pediatric surgeon and CEO and founder of Surgeon Innovative Solutions, transforming healthcare with AI, robotics, extended reality, and digital therapeutics. As Medical Director of Innovation at Children's Nebraska, he spearheaded the state's first use of virtual reality in pediatric surgery and drives the development of virtual reality platforms, 3D modeling, and digital solutions. We are honored to have you with us, Patrick.
Grateful to be here.
Fantastic. And I want to start today from the very beginning. And Ed, I'm hoping you can help me.
Sure.
Please explain for our audience, what are digital therapeutics and how are they different from some of the more widely known digital health tools?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the easiest way I've tried to explain this over the years is if you think of the digital health ecosystem almost like a galaxy with a lot of planetary bodies moving in and out of it, and there's a lot of overlap. And things like telehealth, clearly digital health. Things like virtual clinical trials, clearly digital health. Things like healthcare IT. And all of those, in some ways, are the digitization of health, taking manual processes and in some way making them more accessible digitally. I think as you get a little more tighter to digital medicine, it's the digital thing is having a medical effect. And then the most specific is digital therapeutics. The digital thing is having a therapeutic effect. And so I think, and not to make a controversial statement, but I think most of us think of digital therapeutics from the idea that it is likely FDA regulated, normally as a software as a medical device. It's likely through prescription or maybe prescription only, and it is making a specific medical claim. And that claim is in some way therapeutic. And so that, to me, is the easiest way to think about it, not from an exclusatory standpoint, but just from a rubric.
Super helpful. Thank you for clearing that up. And now that we know about the distinctions, Sarah, can you tell us what excites you most about the digital therapeutics landscape?
Wearables, right? How many of you all have smartwatches on your wrist, Apple Watch, Android Watch, Samsung Galaxy Watch? How about EEG headbands? EEG meditation headbands. Yeah, some hands in the audience. So what excites me is the ability to turn that data, instead of just tracking it like we've done for decades, is interacting with it, developing a relationship with your data that you're not just a flat number that's sequestered to your wrist anymore, that it's spatial, it's sentient, and it's set out into the world and is something that you can actually see and learn to control. So I love all of these wearables that are coming out on the market, and the ability to create content with that wearables that allows the user to learn to self-regulate all of that biometric data, from their heart rate to their brain patterns to their blood pressure, anything that captures data. So very, very bullish on that as it relates to not only digital therapeutics, but also digiceuticals, which is, one layer below digital therapeutics as it relates to the regulatory landscape. And I think hand in hand, those digiceuticals have a relationship inside digital therapeutics as being that one step before you get to the full-blown therapeutic.
Right, absolutely. Data coming out of our ears, but what are we doing with it? I love that. And Patrick, I'd love to come to the doctor in the room for your take from the front lines of healthcare delivery. How can digital therapeutics address unmet needs in healthcare, and what can they mean for your patients?
So I think when it comes to what are the unmet needs, when you go into a hospital environment, it can be a pretty scary place. As a surgeon, the work that I do is pretty much prescriptive in the context that you need a procedure, it's performed. However, while that's the management of a surgical problem, the art of medicine is where the imagination needs to be released from my perspective. And when it comes to patients that are coming into the hospital, how do you take that trepidation and that fear, and how do you turn that into tranquility? So I think the opportunity to interact and use digital therapeutics is a way to reach into the emotional state of the patients, and to reach into the emotional state of the patients and address their concerns and their needs. So I think that when we look at digital therapeutics and the utility of digital therapeutics and the utility of them, it's how are we designing those experiences such that people can actually get the health care that they need, feel a sense of being seen, but also feeling better and that they're healing better.
Absolutely, and that holds a lot of promise. But arguably, digital health has held promise for the last 20 years. And Jeff, I want to come to you to give us your take on why the time is now for digital therapeutics and what is accelerating that value proposition.
Thanks, Gemma. I've been coming to CES on and off for 20 years, and this is a place of tremendous optimism. As I walk around and I see all of these halls of people working on solving problems. And I think that's the why now. We have tremendous energy around solving healthcare, solving the problems of healthcare. I think people have better tools today with AI and a lot of the wearables and access to data that better tools than they've ever had. I was talking to a CEO last night of a digital therapeutics company who over the weekend used AI to create a video and do a campaign, and he said, I got 10 physicians to sign on, and he said, then I turned it over to my marketing department on Monday and told them to build a campaign. He could have never done that 10 years ago or 5 years ago. He's learning in real time. I think I'm tremendously optimistic about the potential for that. The pandemic cracked the window in using digital on a daily basis for people, and I think there's also been some scarcity in the market for capital. I do investments, and that capital scarcity has forced people to actually try business models that have potential. And so I've seen a lot of experimentation in this space, and people aren't generally just working on science projects right now. They're working on things that have a business model attached to them and are ideally will be fundable and scalable.
Absolutely, and so many points there that I want to come back to, but I want to stay a little bit on that financial incentives piece. we've heard now what digital therapeutics are, why they're exciting, how they are impacting the healthcare space, and why we're seeing an acceleration of the value proposition. So let's dive a little bit more into that. And Ed, perhaps you can tell us, what is it that the industry is paying attention to in terms of regulatory, financial changes? Something big happened 1st of January this year, so maybe you can say a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, I think for those of us that have been in this industry for a long time, I've been in digital therapeutics for about a decade now, 2024 was, and going into 2025 will probably be the year that we look back on and say was the most transformational year within this. And it's not because of technology, and it's not because of adoption, and it's not because of mindset, it's because of statutes. Like the thing is that those of us who are in health, the things that unlock things are statutory changes. A really good example is continuous glucose monitoring. No one ever doubted the science of continuous glucose monitoring or technologically how to do it. But it was not reimbursable until 2016. And then it was put inside of a benefit category, and then there was a way to get it to patients. So for those of you that don't know, prior to about a month and a half ago, digital therapeutics could not be reimbursed through CMS. There was no mechanism to do that because software as a medical device fell outside of the benefit category. And then because of a lot of advocacy, and for those of you, if you're not already members of CTA, you should be, they were amazing advocates. They made a huge difference along with several other groups to advocate to Congress, to advocate to CMS to create what is now 3 new codes that are directly reimbursing digital mental health therapies and digital mental health treatments, which are digital therapeutics. And to me, that's the unlock. Because if the only way that we can build things is build things for people that have expendable capital, we're only going to build things for people that have expendable capital. But that's not how health works. Health works, we see a huge problem and say, oh, let's go beat up that problem and let's get it to those people that deserve it. So the idea that this is the first step of permanent and ruggedized reimbursement of digital therapeutics, I think it's going to change the indications we go in totally. And to me, I mean, it was not always going to happen. It could have maybe never happened. But then hundreds of people over a decade pushed and pushed and pushed, and then it happened. And I think between that and PDURS, which we may come to in a later bit, I think this catalyzing moment that we're in is going to be the year that we saw the unlock of how digital therapeutics actually get to patients.
Fantastic. And it is brilliant to see that we are starting to see real financial incentives. Jeff, I don't know if you want to add more to that. Why do we need these incentives?
I think there are a couple of reasons. One, behavior change is difficult, and adding financial incentives to the mix for health systems, potentially for patients and others, they can be an important carrot in that behavior change, and in getting getting a digital therapeutic into an EMR where it's surfaced to a physician at the appropriate time for the appropriate patient. I think that there are, it's also very important from an investment standpoint in that these new regulations give us some little bit of predictability in revenue streams when we're looking at companies. And that's what investors are looking for. We absolutely look for that. We're also looking at not just being reliant on those particular CMS codes, but looking at direct consumer models. We've launched 3 products at Otsuka in the last 6 months that are all essentially direct consumer. One is prescription, 2 are not. So we're testing those models. Our portfolio companies are testing those models as well as reimbursement models. But those financial incentives are a critical part of the behavior change.
Absolutely, and definitely of prominent importance, but let's not forget they're not the only pull factor, and you mentioned direct to consumer. I want to come to the point of the consumer, and Sarah, for you to comment on that standpoint. Do these changes have an impact directly on consumer acceptance, which is another big piece of this, and what are the trends that you're seeing emerging?
Yeah, absolutely. And certainly it does have an impact, right? When your insurance company reimburses for that product and is recommending that product, it adds legitimacy, it adds trust that you're using it, and it also increases the likelihood that you'll use it in the first place. How many people do we have from Germany in the audience, a few. So it's really interesting to watch their model, not only what's happening in the US, but also, around the world with the proliferation of these new codes. And, digital therapeutics, you've always been able to reimburse for interventions that happen in the provider's office as a part of general therapy, right? So it'll be interesting to see with these new codes if how much of an impact. We know it'll have an impact as it relates to the consumerism of healthcare and the likelihood they'll use it just from a cost, from a trust, and an efficacy perspective as well.
Fantastic. And of course, we can't talk about the why now with considering the impact that the pandemic has had, and it was touched on lightly, but Patrick, seismic shifts across the healthcare model. Can you speak more to the impact of the pandemic and how it paves the way for digital therapeutics?
So absolutely. One of the things that I think the pandemic did is it completely changed the relationship of the patient with their providers. All of a sudden, you're in this environment where people's lives are being lost due to the unknown impact of this virus, and we're trying to track the impacts in real time. And that creates an accessibility issue. You're just not able to jump into your car and drive to your doctor's office. Is that waiting area safe? So I think one of the things that the pandemic did was ushered in new ways to interact with your clinicians. And one was through Zoom or telehealth or FaceTime. I think we were really trying to figure out the best ways to still see our doctors, still get our prescriptions filled, and stay healthy at the same time. So one of the benefits of digital therapeutics is that now if a patient needs to see their physician, and you have a wearable that can sense your oxygen saturation, or you have a smartwatch that can detect whether or not you have an arrhythmia, or you have the ability to correct, other data that's needed by your physician. Because let's think about it. When you go to your doctor, what does your doctor ask you? What's going on? What are your problems? And then he goes into the objective part of the examination, which is, what are your vital signs? So now that we have technology that can reproduce those vital signs in a medium that's digital, and then using telehealth or using Zoom, then now we're able to still preserve that relationship with the physician being able to take care of their patient in a meaningful way. And while the pandemic disrupted community and that sense of community, these tools were enabling us now to create new community ecosystems where the doctor can not only still be a provider and provide the services that they need to, but now they're using all these different digital tools that are creating tons of data. And now it's a matter of synthesizing that data to kind of come up with creative ways to treat diseases in a more meaningful way. You mentioned the glucose monitoring. So that's something that's super important, that you have that data, but how is that data being presented to physicians? So it's causing physicians now and hospital teams to reimagine the ways that we can take that data, make it interpretable, and make it available to the patients.
Absolutely. I think the pandemic showed us that we can overcome a lot of barriers, but there are still an awful lot of barriers to overcome. We've heard about why now is the time for digital therapeutics to scale. We've heard about the reimbursement conditions, but what are some of the challenges that still persist in terms of getting digital therapeutics covered, and how can they be overcome? Jeff, perhaps you want to comment?
Yeah, I think that the challenges today are really probably not that much different than they were 6 or 8 years ago. You have to, for a digital therapeutic to be adopted, you have to have data that shows clinical impact, and you have to be able to show the person who's going to pay for it that there's an ROI, and that you can actually engage people, and that they will stay engaged in this to a meaningful end. And I think that's challenging, and it's what makes the development of digital therapeutics still really a difficult proposition. You have to not only do the trial to show clinical efficacy and impact, which is which may include going through the FDA process, but you also really need to gather enough data to be able to go to a payer or an employer and say that in a large population, we can give you a 4-to-1 ROI, and that in a population of 10,000 people, 1,000 will complete this, and you can see this kind of financial impact. That's expensive. The new coverage codes make it a little bit easier to project those as an investor. AI gives you some tools that we haven't had before. One of the things that we're dealing with right now with a couple of our portfolio companies and internally is that back-end system that unites the potentially multiple digital therapeutics is an area of opportunity. So part of the reimbursement challenge is that a lot of employers and particularly employers don't want a bunch of one-offs. They want something that deals with women's health issues or mental health issues. They don't want 20 solutions. They want one that maybe has all of those. So we're working with a bunch of with our portfolio companies and with some of our own products to try and centralize these on a platform where we can maybe go and say, we have a women's health platform that can help from the prenatal stage all the way through to perimenopause and menopause. And doing the same in mental health. So I think that those platform approaches will help with reimbursement also.
Fantastic, thank you. And Ed, coming from a company like Pfizer, does that resonate with you? Are you exploring similar models to overcome those sorts of challenges?
I mean, yeah, for sure. I do think, though, and I can say this because Hugh and I have been friends for a long time, I'm a little bit probably more bullish. And the reason for that is I do think there were some permanent tectonic shifts that changed the board. Like you think about electric cars, there's like a bunch of people tried in the 70s, they all went bankrupt. 80s went bankrupt, 90s went bankrupt, now the most valuable company in the world, right? And so what happens is sometimes you're just too early. And sometimes these macro factors that have to happen haven't happened yet. And tragically, I think when we look back, the thing that will have changed the board for digital therapeutics was the pandemic. And the easiest stat in the world is percentage of grandparents that could use Zoom in 2020 versus today. So that was like 0.07% to 70%. I don't know how many orders of magnitude that is, but that's a lot, right? And the idea of telehealth visits, like, I'm not doing this over video, I want to see my doctor, to I'm not going into a hospital, can he do it on, or can he or she do it on video? Like, we're in a different world than we were in 2019. And most of it was not of our doing, right? These were reactions to this meteor that struck the earth, and this fallout shifted everything. But technology adoption, I mean, we've got 6 billion smartphones for 8 billion people, and we're building smartphones at a much faster rate than we're building people. And so eventually, we're gonna be able to get health to almost everyone. And that wasn't true even 5 years ago, and it definitely wasn't true 10 years ago. And then the thing that we could influence, the thing that Catherine and Renee and members from CTA and DTA and Avamed and Otsuka and lots of different companies pushed on, is now there is a statutory way to do it. So I think, having been a CEO in the previous era of digital therapeutics versus being a leader in the digital therapeutic era now, it is very much like, I think there's a new world, but we keep losing ships halfway across the ocean to, holy smokes, there's a new world. And I think that's exciting, because we could have done this for another 20 years and never got here, but we're here now. And that, to me, is why it's an inspirational time to be in this, because the opportunity for scale is almost like nothing else we've ever seen.
Absolutely, and that momentum has to continue across all areas, and I think we have a great panel here that is representative of a lot of those areas. And I would love to hear more about provider involvement. Patrick, are there challenges that are unique to digital therapeutics when it comes to provider adoption, and in the same way that there are, for things like remote patient monitoring products? What are some of those?
Sure, well, I'll approach that through 3 different lenses, one at the enterprise level, the other at the provider level, and the other at the patient level. At the enterprise level, you have to have a hospital that's committed, or an organization that's committed to innovation, that is seeking different ways to treat disease. And I think if you have or you're fortunate to be in a hospital system where they embrace innovation, they embrace technology, then digital therapeutics and virtual reality as a digital therapeutic will not be a strange concept. But then let's take it to the provider level. I mean, providers today are being trained to take care of patients, but they're not necessarily being trained to use their imagination to create new products to take care of patients. For example, virtual reality is definitely helpful for patients that have stress, but what's the environment where that's deployed? That's deployed in an environment where the providers or the physicians have actually had some exposure to the power of virtual reality as a digital therapeutic. The first time that I used the therapy was in 2020 during the pandemic. It was on a young lady that came in with an intestinal obstruction and she required surgery. And so I performed the surgery laparoscopically, had to resect some bowel, but then afterwards, the question was, well, how do we address the pain her pain requirement needs? And I'm in a hospital that hasn't used it as a digital therapeutic before. The concept was foreign. We used a virtual reality headset on the child. She didn't require as much narcotics as she did. And she was up and walking around the next day, in her room. And before she left, her family said that she had to take a picture with me. Again, this is in the middle of the pandemic, so I'm wearing a couple of different masks, and she hugs me around my leg. So what is the return on investment for that experience? The return on investment for that experience, from my perspective, is the child did not require a lot of narcotics, and we understand the power of narcotics being out in the communities and their impact when they're overprescribed. But then also the smile and the stress that was on the child's face and on the parents' face when they recognized that their child actually was better when they came in, and when they left the hospital, it wasn't a scary experience. So I think the opportunity for other physicians to understand the power of that is actually having that personal experience. One last story, my godsons have autism, and when they were going to their primary care visit, their well child visit, they could never get the kids out of the car because they would scream and they would yell and they were crying and upset. Fortunately, they had a good physician that would come out to the car, did their examinations, insert virtual reality as a digital therapeutic. Now they're immersed in an environment where they're spraying animals and washing them, shooting bubbles that have colors. And now they're actually able to complete their entire well child visit in the office, and they're actually able to get their immunizations and shots without any problems. So once you expose that to the nurses and the doctors that are in that environment, that's where their return on investment comes in as the buy-in. And then from the consumer perspective, when the consumers are out here using these immersive products from virtual reality for decreasing anxiety or just decreasing stress or increasing fitness, well, that is changing their physiology and changing their biology and changing their health. And that in turn is going to cause them to seek the providers that are actually using this technology. So if you're not using this technology as a provider, your consumers are going to become smart as more and more digital therapeutics are available, and they're going to seek those physicians that actually understand how to use the data, are willing to use the data, and can, more importantly, imagine different ways to manage health with the data that they receive.
Absolutely, yeah, it's a real tide. And Sarah, do you agree? Are you seeing that trend with consumers demanding?
Absolutely. Immersive media is just as effective as a dose of hydromorphine, Dilaudid, a very powerful painkiller. And when you can quickly interrupt the stress response, it has a huge impact. And as it relates to, that consumerism of health and reimbursement codes, there's programs, not just here in the US, but also overseas, the DIGA program, DIGA. I'd encourage you all to look into it. That has some fascinating onboarding modalities that places these digital therapeutics in the real world and also in the provider's hands to discover them, not only for pain, but also for stress management as well. And certainly of the stories of the transformative power. With helium, we were giving an intervention to an individual who had conceivably lost the use of his hands. He wasn't able to lift his hands above his head. His provider told us that you'll have to place the goggles on him because he's not able to physically do it himself. But halfway through that experience, his arms were above his waist, and he was reaching out to the people that he saw, inside the goggles. So powerful, transformative tool that's not necessarily meant to be a replacement for psychotropic medication or professional counseling, but certainly has great value in these areas. And that hurdle is education. not just for the patients, but for the providers as well.
These stories are so important. Your godson, your patients, your consumers whose lives have been changed. They show us how far we've come in just the last 5 years, but there are still some ways to go. And Ed, perhaps I can come to you for your take on what needs to happen in the next 5 to 10 years to realize the potential that we've been hearing about here today.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the great things at being an event like CES is it's full of innovators. And I think this is going to sound maybe trivial, but it's meant to be the opposite, is what's it going to take is us caring, is us actually making it happen. Things don't just happen. Humans make them happen. Like, we don't have a cure for polio, and then we do. We don't know how to sail across the oceans, and then we did, right? And I think it's one of those things that if you think about the impact of what happens if this is successful, right? Of the 6 billion people that have smartphones and the 8 billion people that are on planet, all of them are more scared than they should be. And all of them are more sad than they should be. And none of them are getting the best care that they could. And the idea that a small group of us, like, I don't know, there's 20,000, 30,000 people probably just in this hotel, and maybe a couple million people in the group, in the vicinity, but you're still talking a fraction of the human population to say, I can actually push on this so that someday 1 billion people, 1 out of every 5, 1 out of every 6 smartphones is managing their health with the supercomputer in their hand. And if you think about that, the idea that you could be some small part of either making 1 billion people live better or live longer, that's how we do it. And from, if you want to, like, a very bolts, nuts and bolts answer, it's we should build more products, we should take them to the FDA, we should get them regulated, we should launch them, we should build more products, we should take them to consumers and employers and match to those needs. But the tech is here, the need has never been greater, the pandemic has made the need greater, but it's like being burdened with glorious purpose, right? That's a really fun thing to be doing. And it's a really meaningful thing to be doing. And I'll make this one point. If you ever want to understand the potential of a digital therapeutic, explain it to a child, because they get it the very first time. Very first time, right? So the stats that say only 2% of adults are creative geniuses, but 98% of children are, that means that we've closed our minds off to what's possible. We did that, right? But if you can explain to a child how a friend on their phone will make them less scared, or a friend on their phone will make them less sad, and it's a medicine that the doctor they really like and they trust gave them, and they get it the very first time you explain it, that means there's an opportunity.
It's a fascinating perspective, and we have our marching orders for the people in the room. We need to make more products, take them to the FDA. I think before we come to some closing remarks, I just really want to focus in on that point, and I think we have some people that are biased with me on stage. We've been hearing a lot about children in the next generation, but where is the need for digital therapeutics greatest? What should we be prioritizing when it comes to addressing the most critical and pressing unmet needs? Patrick, perhaps you can take that.
Yeah, I'll start with one of my favorite quotes by, Einstein, and that is, imagination is more important than knowledge. And that was a pretty smart dude. And I'll also start out with saying, what's the first question that your provider or your doctor should ask you when you come in for your visit? How can I help you? And I think when you look at those two statements, the next thing that we have to tackle is the responsibility of creating meaningful products. But I want to really emphasize that we have to design meaningful products that have empathy built within them, that are actually listening to what the patients, the customers need. So while we're going out here and we're creating new digital therapeutics, we really need to be cognizant. Are we really answering the question of how can I help you? Are we really addressing the needs of the consumers that we're taking care of? And I think the first thing you have to do is you honestly have to actively listen and actively design and actively be bold enough to use your imagination. And if you do those things, then you will be contributing to the art of healing and the art of medicine. I think a lot of physicians want to go, again, to not dealing with burnout, but burning out disease. And I think that's a very powerful way to do it.
It's very hard to argue with Einstein, so thank you for that. And thank you all for helping us to navigate this topic so expertly, from understanding what digital therapeutics are, why we should be excited right now in this moment as an industry and as consumers and as patients. But also thank you for helping us keep our feet on the ground and focused on the task ahead. We've heard that there are still a ways to go in terms of the vital issues of reimbursement and adoption and trust. And I would love to draw today's session to a close with a reflection from each of you, and we'll go down the line in terms of what you would like the audience to take away from today's discussion. One thing, please. Ed, we'll start with you.
Yeah, the thing I'd leave you with is, I think the best way to think about digital therapeutics and digital medicine is it's empathy at scale. And the reason I say that is there is nothing more personal in our life than the supercomputer in our pocket, right? All of us have them, and I bet none of us use it the exact same way. And none of us have all the same apps. And it's probably the first thing you look at when you wake up. I mean, I try to look at my wife first, but I probably look at my phone. And it's definitely the last thing I look at when I go to bed. And so it is this incredibly, incredibly personal thing that is with you all the time. And yet it is scaled on a level that nothing else has scaled except books. So something that is an individual human experience has scaled on a quantum that only books have. And so to me, the idea that you could be hyper-personalized, hyper-empathetic, and meet that person in that exact moment, not just 2 p.m. on a Tuesday, but 2 a.m. on a Tuesday. I mean, the way I feel about all of us in this industry is we are authors in the era of Gutenberg. Like, something's happened, and now just a few people could read what we wrote, and now everyone can read what we wrote. And that is a magical time to be alive. And so that's what I want the audience to feel. And for those of you in this industry, all of us on this panel, I'm grateful, because I have a little girl that's going to live in the world that we either build or don't build. And I think we are going to build it, which is going to be a better world.
Fantastic, absolutely a new frontier. Jeff, your one takeaway, please.
It's hard to follow Ed. He's one of the OGs of this space, and it's an honor to be on stage with him and sort of hearing his inspirational words here. My one takeaway is, I think, if you're building digital therapeutics and you're investing in digital therapeutics, really focus on solving a problem that matters to patients. And we launched a digital therapeutic at Otska in the last 6 months that is a prescription digital therapeutic that treats depression. And I had to explain it to my child, and I said, it's something on your phone that helps make you happy. And my kid got it. They said, well, that makes a lot of sense. And I think the more that we focus on solving real problems for real people, the better chance we have of seeing that adoption wave take over and really make the phone in our pocket the most powerful piece of healthcare that we interact with on a daily basis. And so I'm really optimistic. Ed said he was more optimistic. I'm very optimistic about the space and hopeful that we'll see real impact in everyone's life in the coming years.
Fantastic. And Sarah, your reflections?
Certainly, this is the stress Olympics, right? And not all of us have trained for it. But we do have some training tools, on our wrists and in headbands and all of these wearables, even sensors that are coming from the camera that have the ability to allow us to learn to not just track our data, but interact with it, create content, and develop a relationship with it. Not just for patients, but for caregivers as well. So important. You reduce stress among the caregivers, you make them make better management decisions, you reduce the likelihood of errors, and increase safety, reduce liability. And so I think going forward, mental health, to me, to answer your question, is a paramount need, not only with the lack of therapists There are 8 million children now out in the world that lack access to school counselors. 77% of counties are in a mental health therapist shortage zone. So we need to have some drugless, non-harmful coping mechanisms for that stress Olympics. And that starts not just with mental health interventions and digital therapeutics, but before that with the digiceuticals and the mental fitness that is teaching you to train your mind just as you would train your physical body. And that begins with not just teaching people how to calm down, but actually allowing them to see their data, see their own brain patterns and heart rate in near real time, something personified as a stress animal that they can learn to control. And I think the more that consumers, as well as providers, are educated about, the ability to see their feelings, the easier it's going to be for them to learn to self-regulate in this mental health emergency.
All of you have talked about the next generation as being absolutely intrinsic and embedded with digital therapeutics. It's been a great through line through all of this. Patrick, if I can come to you for final remarks.
Yeah, sure. So I'll say this as a pediatric surgeon and a clinical informaticist and somebody that uses robotic technology and virtual reality as a digital therapeutic. The first thing, we all have had a family member that's been in the hospital, a child that's been sick, a family member that we have to take care of, or is struggling with our own health issues. And what is it that we really want? I think at the end of the day, no matter what product you design, you want somebody to actually ask you, how can I help you? And you want a tailored solution that can actually help you deal with whatever health ailment or issue that you're challenged with. So I think digital therapeutics actually gives us the opportunity, again, for all the designers, that are here, or if you don't have a designer on your team, you should have a designer on your team, because they will actually help you build products effectively and efficiently, because I think they ask the question, how can I help you? What is it that you need? And when we're trying to tackle this enormous problem of making healthcare, meaningful, or making healthcare interpretable, I think the power of the imagination is what we really need to unleash. So my final takeaway would be is, as we're creating these products that are going to help change the healthcare ecosystem and save lives, don't be afraid to use your imagination, and don't be afraid to partner with other people that can really drill down the question of what do we really need to create to generate the greatest impact.
Fantastic, thank you. Don't be afraid to use your imagination. Well, I've learned a lot. I hope that the audience have too. I'd like to thank all of my panelists, not just for their contribution to the discussion, but to a really exciting industry, your fantastic work, and I hope that you have a fantastic rest of your CES. Thank you all.